Всем привет, меня зовут Ренат Давлетгильдеев, и сегодня вот о чем я хочу поговорить. Год прошел с начала войны, ну или, наверное, правильнее было бы сказать полномасштабного вторжения России в Украину. Все-таки война началась в этой стране еще в 2014 году, и я предпочитаю именно вот такой подсчет. Но до сих пор никто, наверное, не смог дать внятного, адекватного ответа, почему все это случилось, почему мы все оказались вот в этой точке, в которой мы находимся сегодня. У меня в гостях сегодня Фредо Ариас-Кингом, соавтор очень любопытного, интересного исследования, которое вышло за полгода до начала войны. Написано оно было для американского Center for Security Policy. И исследование это представляет собой психологический портрет Владимира Путина, а точнее было бы даже сказать психосексуальный портрет. Итак, Фредо, добрый день, рад приветствовать в эфире. Расскажите, почему Путин, с вашей точки зрения, мог начать эту войну? Каковы его психосексуальные мотивы?
Ну, спасибо, Ренат, за вопрос. I will continue in English. So yes, there are several theories as to why Vladimir Putin started this war, and none of them make a lot of sense. In fact, some of the most knowledgeable people in Washington and Harvard and other places with access to a lot of intelligence and a lot of resources and a lot of contacts still cannot explain why Putin started this nonsensical war against Ukraine. For example, my friend Alexandra Vokruks, who runs the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard, mentioned that there must be something we don't know, because what we do know about why Putin started this war does not make any sense. Another one, the person in charge at the State Department in Washington of dealing with Russia, her name is Wendy Sherman, well, specifically Ukraine in this crisis. She mentioned Russia is not aware of her national interests. And I can mention many examples of how even some of the closest people to Vladimir Putin were caught off guard. And I think we saw that when he, for some strange reason, put on national television the session of his national security people, and he kept asking them about what was going to happen, and they were confused as to what Putin's intentions were. Annexation of the Donbass, the occupied provinces of the Donbass, they did not know, and Putin humiliated them on national television. So a scholar I admire greatly from Germany, a Sovietologist, his name is Andreas Umland, and Umland said he analyzed this war from the rationalist perspective. In other words, the classic international relations theory, and the realist theory, the rational choice theories and things like that. And he could not explain this war. So I have my own theory, as you saw in that paper that was published in Washington about a year and a half ago, together with Dr. J. Michael Waller, who's a longtime expert on Russia and Latin America, mind you. And we both wrote something that has not really been explored, which is Putin's not so much psychology, because others have attempted to analyze Putin's psychology as a sociopath, as a narcissist, as, you know, whatever, who had childhood issues. But this more specifically, psychosexuality. Now, why did we do that? Because Putin fits almost perfectly. I think there's 21 signs or symptoms of a homosexual man in denial, what they call colloquially as a closeted gay, explored by Edmund Bergler, among others. Edmund Bergler, as you know, was one of Freud's disciples. He studied directly under Freud, and then he went on to dedicate 40 years of his career to really one thing, which was to counsel stressed men gay men in denial who would go to him in Austria, in Vienna, and in New York, basically with one petition. Look, doctor, I mean, I have a wife, I have kids, I have a reputation, I have a career, but there's this other part of me which has to stay secret and separate. And Burglar would basically, say, well, sit down and lie down on this couch and tell me about your childhood, tell me about this. So for 40 years, he dedicated his life, and he ended up writing 3 books on the topic. And guess what? Of the 21 symptoms that Burglar explored, Burglar plus others, because others followed Burglar, Vladimir Vladimirovich fits 20 of those 21 perfectly. So I am willing to bet that, like Adolf Hitler, who was an extreme masochist, in fact, these are not my words, these are the words of Professor Langler, I think his name was, out of Harvard University. He and Carl Jung, who was another one of Freud's disciples, were hired by the US government to psychoanalyze Hitler and predict what was going to happen and maybe how to sort of influence him in some way. And Langler basically predicted that Hitler may have had sexual problems, although that was never conclusively proven, but there are many hints. But he also predicted that he was an extreme masochist, and he was really trying to take revenge on Germany, the German people. I guess after 9 million dead, we can conclusively say that. And then Hitler, at the end, before he committed suicide, he said, well, the Germans were not even worthy of me. Something like that, which is called extreme superciliousness or megalomania. Putin has a lot of these parallels. So it's not just hyperbole. He's taking revenge on the Russia that humiliated him growing up. Why? Because as a teenager, I guess when he started discovering that he was a homosexual, he was probably harassed viciously. And a lot of this comes through in prior studies, including his own. I think it's called Spirva Litsa, his unofficial autobiography, where I think Natalia Gevorkian plays a role in interviewing him. I mean, it's a very favorable book to Putin. He really wants to convey what he wants to convey, his macho image. But unwittingly in that book, strangely enough, Renat, he describes himself in favorable terms, but what he doesn't realize is that some of these favorable terms are exactly the symptoms that Edmund Burglar describes in those 21, symptoms of a homosexual man in denial. And you'll never guess what the first one of those symptoms is. It is how he treats other gays. It's incredible, but Gorbachev, Yeltsin never harassed gays that I can remember. Why would they? They had much bigger things to do, I guess. Harassing gays was just not associated with them. Whereas with Putin, it's almost a daily occurrence when there's some incident. He defined his regime and his conservative values and Christian morals and versus the decaying West, accusing everybody of being gay. Here, he is falling into 2 of the classic symptoms of gay men in denial. One, they mistreat open and proud gays, which is paradoxical. A gay in denial absolutely hates proud and open gays, okay? The second one is that he accuses everyone else of being gay. And if you notice, he accuses Ukraine of being pro-gay, of the West. The entire satanic West is, falling into the hands of homosexuals. And, he even accuses individual leaders through third parties like Emmanuel Macron of being a homosexual. So Edmund Burglar immediately, if he was alive today, Edmund Burglar would say, Vladimir Putin is one of my patients, and he should be one of my patients. He desperately, what he needs to do is come out of the closet, as they say, to admit that if he was not the president of Russia, of a highly homophobic society, which is Russia, and not trying desperately to hang on to power and not controlling nuclear weapons and armies and a veto in the Security Council of the United Nations, what Edmund Bergler would tell him is, you need to come out. Now, there's something else which is very interesting. How do I know Edmund Bergler? Because my father in Mexico was a sort of a little Edmund Bergler. He wrote a book on Freud, by the way. He's written a lot of things on psychoanalysis. My father, that is. And gay men would read about these things and they would just show up. And since I was small, I remember them, some of them became very close friends of the family. And they would show up with really, falling apart. You can imagine how difficult it is to be hiding that part of your identity in a society that is very intolerant. So, I mean, Black people, Jewish people, whatever, they suffer racism, anti-Semitism, but, they cannot hide their identity, really. I mean, to a limited extent. Gays can hide it. And so they live in what's called a private hell, Lichny ad in Russian. And so these, gay otritsani, or these gays in the closet, would show up at the house and beg my father, please help me. And my father and my mother, by the way, who was a PhD in psychology and taught at the university, both of them would treat them, and they would say, well, sit down and tell me about and of course be very normal and very humane to them. But these people came in very bad shape, some of them, and they were very aggressive. And I remember one of them in particular, let's call him Jose, just to keep his identity. Well, not that it matters. He's probably long gone. Jose, when I saw Vladimir Putin for the first time in 99, maybe 98, 99, when he started appearing as the head of the FSB and later as prime minister and later as acting president, that was Jose. The same facial expressions, the same gestures, it's shocking how similar Vladimir Putin is to my father's and my mother's, the person they would counsel away from his crisis and social pathologies. Of course, gays who hide their identity suffer greatly, and the problem is that they make everyone else suffer. And that is why both my parents, as well as Bergler and many others who have counseled these very, troubled people, have always told them the same thing. You really need to tell your wife the truth. You need to tell your boss the truth. You need to come out. You need to tell your children. You need to be proud of who you are. Join a gay club, things like that. Move to San Francisco. Move to Stockholm. Move to Prague. Move to a place that will tolerate you. And so that I'm sure some of my parents' people that they counseled, I'm sure they did that, and they probably are better people as a result. So now that you've heard everything about why Putin's psychosexuality, let me then make a bet, Renat. I'm willing to bet that 5 years from now, this is going to be the standard explanation for this war, because nothing else really explains this highly masochistic act of destruction, not only against Ukraine, against Russia, against everything that Putin had been trying to build when he was more or less in balance and under control, an economy, a reputation around the world, but then something happened, something clicked. And he did this. He did something in 2014, which started to ruin everything he had been achieving. And then in 2022, in February 24th. So I'm willing to bet that it was a spontaneous act based on a perceived slight, because gay men in denial, for some strange reason, are extremely sensitive to slights. In other words, slights meaning that they feel that somebody offended them. So maybe he felt offended by Zelensky. Maybe he demanded that, back then Ukraine reinstall Yanukovych, and they didn't, and that's when he invaded Crimea and the Donbass. And this time, who knows what triggered that, that impulse. Gay men in denial are very impulsive. And so we have all this cocktail of problems. And I think out of that came this war that has claimed well over 200,000 lives. And, well, Russia's immediate future, no less. Thank you for the question, Renat.
Да, спасибо, Фредо. Это действительно очень интересная версия, но все-таки остается вопрос, почему тогда Владимир Путин продолжает эту войну, почему не может никак ее закончить? Он боится проиграть?
Well, there's a known theory, which is called colloquially the gambler's dilemma, or the sunk costs. So every time Biden or President Biden or the State Department or the Pentagon or the French president or whoever, the German chancellor, especially the German chancellor Scholz, when they try to build off-ramps, the UN Secretary General did the same thing, trying to convince Putin for an off-ramp, so to save face. In other words, well, yeah, you've already invaded Ukraine, but you're losing. Why don't you, just sort of take the off-ramp? That's impossible because Putin has already sunk so much, has already bet so much into this that if he takes that off-ramp, he will crash and die. So he needs to just suck it up. He knows that quitting now will be for sure the end of his regime. Whereas if he continues, there's still a chance that he may just win something, that he can sell to the Russian people as a victory, that he may just save his regime. He may even save his reputation a little bit. And so the off-ramp strategy was a loser since the very beginning. The one that knew that from the very beginning also was President Zelensky of Ukraine. I think he's very insightful. People mock him for being a performer, a funny guy, an actor. But Ronald Reagan was also an actor, and yet he understood Russia much better than all the others who had been, whatever, engineers like Jimmy Carter, or even Sovietologists who would give some pretty bad advice to United States presidents. Zelensky, just like Reagan, he has this intuition. He can read people. You don't need to teach him psychology because he kind of already knows psychology. Every day he practices it empirically by making people laugh. He kind of knows people's fears and hopes and the unconsciousness. So I think an actor, should be a president of every country. That's just me talking. But Putin cannot stop this war, and Zelensky knew that he can only be defeated. Once Putin is defeated, and he has to retreat in humiliation, who knows? Maybe it'll be, unfortunately, like Saddam Hussein when he was crushed in the first Gulf War that he initiated in August 2nd, 1990. And he lost, but brutally, decisively. And every Arab leader friendly to the United States told President Bush Sr. that not to do anything else because Saddam Hussein was going to fall by himself, and he did not. And he continued to cause problems. Imagine that. Or it could be like some other dictators that I can mention, several of them. Once the people lose the fear of that dictator, they also lose the respect of that dictator, and then anything can happen. And so Putin could go either way. Putin could go either way. I get the feeling, and I don't know why, but I get the feeling that once Putin starts to really look weak and pathetic, not just to his base, to his elites know exactly what's happening on the ground, then you never know. It could be like Russia in World War I, where the Tsar was essentially invited to abdicate by his elites, and a provisional government was formed based on the Duma. So I think something similar could happen this time, although the opposition to Putin has been exiled, and I know they're organizing in exile. So who knows? I think a transitional figure could come to power. But that's all speculation. That's pure speculation. why Putin cannot stop this war, and he will, like Hitler, until the very end. He just resisted giving up when he could, probably still before the Battle of the Bulge, have negotiated something with Churchill, with Roosevelt, with Stalin. He chose to keep fighting until the bitter end. And a lot of that was driven by his very particular psychology. Again, revenge against the German people, against the Austrian people, just like analyzed by Professor Langler at Harvard and by Carl Jung in Switzerland. Or, Putin could be exactly the same way. He will fight until the last Russian soldier is dead, wounded, humiliated, in retreat. And then I guess he will have to wait for some generals to visit him at the Kremlin. And then what? Or he could commit suicide. Who knows? But a lot will be revealed about Vladimir Putin after his defeat. I think, I'm telling you, from 2 years from now, 5 years from now, the theory that Vladimir Putin was driven by his inner hell and his desire, his unconscious, his powerful unconscious desire for revenge against the Russia that humiliated him since he was little, sending all those men to their deaths, the same archetype of men, tall, strong, muscular, hairy, the same ones that probably violated him since he was a small boy, since he was a teenager, since he was a young adult, the same ones that humiliated him growing up. He's sending those very same men, these same archetypes, to their deaths. And so I get the feeling that not only Putin will fall, whether he survives or not, it's a matter of speculation, of historical chance. What I do know is that his regime will probably end as well, brutally. Don't forget, Russia takes very sharp turns on a dime. I remember a relative of Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev complaining that Brezhnev went from being the god of, the Soviet Union, a hero with all those medals and a brave whatever, and during Gorbachev's anti-corruption campaign, which was essentially an anti-Brezhnev campaign against some of his relatives, and also the era of stagnation, what Gorbachev called, epocha zastoy, everybody would avoid Brezhnev's relatives. In other words, before, the Russians would all go, the Soviets would all go to these relatives. Oh, you're Leonid Ilyich is such a son of light and hope for the peoples of the world. Poor Russia. Russia itself suffers a psychological problem, by the way. Anyway, and when Gorbachev started his anti-Brezhnev campaign, no one would talk to those people. They would literally cross the street to avoid walking by them when they saw them coming in the street. That's how they're close friends. That's how Russia is. So I'm also willing to bet that a few years from now, nobody in Russia is going to admit that they were once believers in Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, admirers of, the great Putin, things like that. Everyone will say, well, no, I was forced to, I was sent, I was coerced, I didn't know, I watched TV, things like that. So anyway, why Putin cannot stop this war? That would be the end of him, Renat. That's my best answer. But again, I will see you very soon again, and and I hope that we can by then celebrate something, the rebirth of Russia. I know Russia will return to normal. Russia will return to the democracy. And Russia is a factory not only of tragedies for herself and for the rest of the world, but Russia is also a factory of just the most amazing heroes. And I can mention so many that I met personally, not just the historical ones that I read about, but people I know and I knew. Galina Starovoitova comes to mind, Yuri Petrovich Shekashikhin, who, by the way, Yuri Petrovich Shekashikhin is the first one that told me back in 2003 that Russia's new president was a homosexual. But Yuri Petrovich did not give it any importance because he was a classic liberal. He was, couldn't care less. I just hope that Russia one day, the spirit of, Gennady Burbulis and Father Gleb Yakunin and Sergei Kovalyov and, all these amazing heroes, Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, some Shenis and Shachrai and the people, and Alexander Nikolaevich Yakovlev, amazing people. And I met every single one of them. I am sure Russia one day will return to that era of magic and hope and good relations with neighbors and things. Russia will survive. In a crippled state, Russia, I don't think in the next 50 years could see itself as a superpower. But Russia will find a role in this world. Russia will be needed by the civilized world against bigger threats that are emerging in this world, even if Russia will by then have maybe 1% of the world's economy. Anyway, so Renat, again, and people like you and people of the LGBTQ community will play a huge role in making sure that the rights of all minorities in Russia are respected. And only then can Russia, and this is a big lesson, by the way, for Russia and for every country, people, nations that are intolerant to minorities, and I mentioned this at the end of my 40-page paper published in Washington about Putin's psychosexuality. I mentioned that when a nation treats badly its minorities, whether it's ethnic minority or religious minority or sexual minorities, one of them, inevitably, when they come to power, they will come to power, and they will take revenge on the rest of the people. And we are seeing Vladimir Putin doing exactly that. So Russia, not just for human rights and for, being nice and playing by the rules of the world, no, for her own survival, you need to avoid another Vladimir Putin. If Russia continues to treat badly its gay people, especially its gay men, guess what? Another Putin will one day again appear, take power, and take revenge against the Russia that humiliated him. So that is a lesson for the future of Russia. Treat your minorities with respect, because then they will treat you with respect and love. Renat, thank you. God bless you. And God bless what you're trying to accomplish in Russia. Russia, again, will belong to the good people, such as you.
Большое спасибо, и напоминаю тем, кто нас смотрел, что говорили мы с Фредо Ариасом-Кингом, автором любопытнейшего исследования о психосексуальности, психологических, сексуальных отклонениях и фиксациях Владимира Путина, которыми, возможно, стоило бы, во всяком случае, это одна из версий, можно было бы объяснить начавшуюся ровно год назад войну.